Today, as we continue our study of time, we think about what do we do about requests when people ask for our time. What do we do when there is an interruption in the schedule? What do we do when there is resistance? John Gibson wrote an interesting bulletin article referring to another bulletin article which has something to do with our topic today. He said in a church bulletin that crossed my desk this morning, a preacher wrote, "For a number of reasons, it is becoming necessary to establish some guidelines for a better use of my time. The need to read, study, and write demands quietness and a lack of disturbance. Consequently, should you call or come by the office to visit and the church secretary informs you that I'm taking no calls or visits before 11 a.m., don't take it personally. I do want to be available and of service. However, unless it is important or serious, beginning this Monday, I will be tied up in preparing the lessons for the week ahead until 11 a.m. each morning. After that time, if you have need to talk, you are of course welcome." Well, that's one way of handling interruptions, but it would be interesting to see how well it works. I couldn't help but reflect on the fact that Jesus was often interrupted as he went about his business. While teaching the disciples of John, he was interrupted. While on his way to raise the daughter of Jairus, he was interrupted. He was interrupted by Peter when he was at prayer. He was interrupted by a leper. He was interrupted while he was preaching in Capernaum. And even on an important mission to Jerusalem, he was interrupted by a blind beggar. Jesus seemed to take all these interruptions in stride. He did not permit them to throw him off balance or to cause exasperation. Patiently, he met the needs of those that came to him. Never once did he hang out a sign saying, "No appointments until 11 a.m. A teacher once remarked, my whole life I've been complaining that my work was constantly interrupted until I discovered that my interruptions were my work." Isn't that interesting? Could you see the point of the preacher who says, I need to have some quiet time? Do you see John Gibson's illustration with Jesus? A week or two after John Gibson's article in his bulletin, Ken Jones replied, "What John said was true. Jesus was often interrupted. Paul was often interrupted. But Jesus and Paul didn't have to study for their sermons. They were inspired." I think that Jesus is the most effective time manager that ever walked upon the earth. He knew why he was here. John 6:38, "For I came down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." And at the end of his life, he tells us that he accomplished what he aimed to do. John 17, verse 4, "I have glorified your name on the earth. I have finished the work which you have given me to do." So it starts out with knowing where we want to go. And once we do that, we have to work through the opportunities and the obstacles that come our way. In Alice in Wonderland, listen to this quote. "Alice found it so when she was confused and asked the Cheshire Cat, 'Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?' 'That depends a good deal on where you want to get to,' said the cat. 'I don't much care where,' said Alice. 'Then it doesn't matter which way you go,' said the cat. 'As long as I get somewhere,' Alice added as an explanation. 'Oh, you're sure to do that,' said the cat. if you only walk long enough. A lot of people wander through life never deciding where they want to go. And it's really tough to get somewhere profitable when I have no idea where it is. So in this lesson, we're going to wobble. How do we deal with all of these? There's no rule that tells you or me when to accept and when to refuse a request. Will you do me a favor? I have to decide what I'm going to do about that. How much do I allow interruptions and when do I eliminate interruptions? When do I change my course when people criticize and resist? When do I proceed in the face of opposition? And of course, a good rule is, what would Jesus do? And that's exactly what we're going to watch today. What would Jesus do? Well, I know what Jesus did do, and we're going to look at that. Let's look at Jesus in ministry. What request do I accept? What request do I refuse? Let's look at the book of Mark. Book of Mark is a Reader's Digest of the life of Christ. 16 chapters, the shortest of the gospel accounts. It starts with the ministry of John, Mark 1, verses 1 through 8, Jesus' baptism, verses 9 through 11, his temptation, verses 12 and 13, his preaching, verse 14, and then in verse 23 of Mark 1, we find this encounter. Now there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, "Let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." And so the unclean spirit says, "Let us alone." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." And so there is an illustration where Jesus was told what to do, and he said, "I'm not going to do it that way. I'm not going to let you alone. I'm telling you, the unclean spirits, get out of it." And then the people were amazed, so that they questioned, what is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. Verses 29 to 31, following right on down in Mark's account, they came into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's wife, mother, lay sick with a fever, and they told him about her at once. So he came and took her by the hand, lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her, and she served them. So here he just went in, saw the mother-in-law of Peter was sick, and he healed her. Verses 29 to 31, or in verses 32 to 34, we find at evening when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. Then he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he did not allow the demons to speak because they knew him. Notice the pattern. Unclean spirit, he cast it out. Simon's mother-in-law, he healed her. The whole city was gathered together at the door, and so he healed the sick and he cast out demons. Now look at the rest of the story, verse 35. Now in the morning, having risen a long time before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and when they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." Now what would you expect Jesus to do? What has he been doing? Heal, cast out demons, assist, minister to people. And so he's out praying. They come and say, "A lot of folks are looking for you." What would you expect? Well, my first inclination would be, say, "Okay, I'll be right there. Probably prayed too long. I ought to cut it off a little later." But that's not what Jesus did. But he said to them, "Let us go into the next towns, that I may preach there also, because for this purpose I have come forth." And he was preaching in their synagogues throughout all Galilee and casting out demons. Isn't that interesting? He said, no, not going to do that today. There may be a lot of people there waiting, but this is not the reason I came to earth. He did heal a lot of people. He had compassion on people. But he said the purpose is to preach the kingdom of God, and I need to go to the next towns. Following that, there was a leper's request, verse 40 and following. A leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down and saying to him, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I'm willing, be cleansed. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Verse 45, he went out and began to proclaim it freely, the leper, and to spread the matter so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places. And they came to him from every direction. And so that's what Jesus did. Sometimes he did what folks asked him to do, and sometimes he didn't. Let's watch Jesus as he encounters interruption and resistance. Mark chapter 5, verse 21. Now when Jesus had crossed over again by the boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, my little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed, so that she will live. So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. What great hope. Little girl's really, really sick, and he said, come quickly. And Jesus said, okay, let's go. Now, verse 25, a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment, for she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? But his disciples said to him, you see the multitude thronging you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Isn't that wonderful? Well, it is. But what if you were that father who had come to ask him to go down to his house to heal his daughter? What do you think's going through his mind while Jesus has been interrupted and he's taking his time to minister to this woman? And what was happening back at the Father's house? While he was still speaking, verse 35, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? He says, too late. God is often late, and this time he didn't show up on time. As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid, only believe. And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult, and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in to them, he said, why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they ridiculed him. King James says they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him and entered where the child was lying. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha cumi, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. And they were overcome with great amazement. And he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat. A request. Jesus says, I'll do it. On the way to the house, he is interrupted and spends some amount of time healing the woman with the issue of blood. He gets there. He's calm. He's on time. He knows exactly what he has done, is doing, and will do. He said, don't worry about it. It's just like she's asleep. I'll wake her up. And they said, that's crazy. They laughed him to scorn. And then he went and did what he needed to do. According to human standard time, God is often late. According to God's sovereign time, God is always on time. Let's go to John chapter 11. Let's look at what happens when Jesus decides to delay. There's the word delay and there's the word procrastinate. Is there a difference? To delay, according to the dictionary, means to postpone until a later time, to defer. To procrastinate means to put off doing something, especially out of habitual carelessness or laziness. To postpone or delay needlessly. Let's keep those two definitions in mind. Let's watch Jesus in John chapter 11. Lazarus, Mary, and Martha were brothers and sisters that lived in the little town of Bethany. Jesus often visited with them. And Jesus received word from the sisters saying, Behold, he whom you love is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, stop right there. What do you do usually when you find that a close friend or a relative is sick? We got to go. We need to make airport reservations, or we need to be sure we need to get in the car. We need to go. We need to go. Let's get there as soon as we can. Verse 6. So when he, Jesus, heard that Lazarus, was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Can you believe that? Here's a man who was close friends with Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, and he hears that his friend is very, very sick, and he just kind of says, well, let's hang out here for a day or two. And they do. Then, after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and you're going there again? Resistance. You sure that's what you want to do? Maybe that's not a good idea. Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. These things he said after that he had said to them, Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, and they thought he was speaking about taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let's go to it. Verse 17, we find Jesus now arriving days later. after he had been notified of Lazarus' sickness. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Now Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Martha said, you're late. If you'd been here, this wouldn't have happened. Let's notice Mary's response, verse 28. And when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary, her sister, saying, the teacher is come and is calling for you. And so Jesus came, verse 32, when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Same response. Lord, where were you? You're late. You could have prevented this. Verse 33, therefore when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled, and he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Shortest verse in the entire Bible, John 11:35. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. And some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? What do you do when God is late? A lot of people question God. Incidentally, we don't find people being condemned for that. But Jesus knew where he was going, what he had done, what he was going to do, and he didn't get too upset about it. Verse 38, then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he's been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Jesus did believed in him. God is always on time. So, let's observe what Jesus did in these different situations and see if we can find some principles that will be helpful to me in deciding how to deal with these outside forces many times and decisions from the inside of my brain that I need to make. How do I deal with those? Number one, am I praying for wisdom in general and for this situation in particular? James 1:5, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. Need to ask the question, is absolute truth involved? If it is, then we just need to do what the Bible says. Matthew chapter 19, a young man, we call him the rich young ruler, came to Jesus and he said, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, keep the commandments. He said, which ones? And Jesus just named some of those 10 commandments that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai. You just need to do what God says to do. So if it's absolute truth, then read the Bible and do what it says. Many times it's not a matter of right and wrong, it's a matter of good, better, best. So have I considered different choices, willing to live with confusion long enough to make a wise decision. I don't know of a better paragraph in all of literature, at least I haven't read it, better than Hebrews 11:24-27. On how do you wrestle many times with right and wrong as well as good, better, and best. What did Moses do when he was 40 years old? By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction of the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect to the recompense of reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who was invisible. Moses was willing to live in that tension until he had weighed the pluses and the minuses, look at the choices, look at the consequences of choice, the pain and the gain and all of those variables, and said, this is the way I need to go. Another question I need to ask, have I taken enough time? Or have I taken too much time to come to this conclusion? See, time is important. Sometimes I need to just make a decision. Sometimes I need to really contemplate what I need to do. I need to ask the question, why do I want to do or not do this particular thing and use my time in this way? What's my motivation? Is it fear? If I'm trying to run away from fear all of my life, I'll just pretty well stay home, because there's danger everywhere. Is it the self-interest, or is it trying to hurt other people? Is it love, real love, wanting the best for others? Is it vengeance? I'm trying to get back at somebody else. Is it for personal spiritual growth? Is it for the strength and encouragement of another? Is it for the growth of my friend? See, I need to ask, what is it that I'm trying to do here? What am I trying to accomplish? What is my attitude toward myself, toward God, and toward others? Psalm 51:6 is powerful. David is writing to God and struggling with the events in his life. He said, behold, you desire truth in the inward parts. In the hidden parts, you'll make me to know wisdom. And so I need to take a deep look inside myself. I need to ask the question, am I trying to please someone else or others rather than doing what I believe to be right or to be the best? Who am I trying to please? Some of the most confused, misdirected people that I observe are people whose main aim in life is to make everybody happy. You talk about an impossible goal, you can't do it. Paul struggles with that in Galatians 1:10. For do I persuade men or God, or do I seek to please men? For if I still please men, I should not be the servant of Jesus Christ. Paul said, I can't make everybody happy. And there's many times when what people want and what Jesus wants, they're at odds with each other, and I need to decide who's going to be my leader. Another question I need to ask, am I settled in my mind? Can I tell myself what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and what I hope to accomplish? What is it I'm trying to do here? In Romans chapter 14, Paul is talking about eating meat offered to idols, or rather eating meat or eating vegetables. He is talking about esteeming one day above another or every day alike. Here's what he says, Romans 14 verse 5. One person esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. Paul said, here's an issue that really doesn't make any difference to God. Really doesn't make any difference. Be sure that whatever you're doing, you've settled it, why you're doing it, in order to do the thing that is best for you and for others. In another occasion, 1 Corinthians 7:37, a man is trying to decide what to do about letting his daughter get married. Or, in another translation, whether to marry a young woman or not. And here's what it says according to the NIV. And I'm looking not so much as whether or not the man needs to get married or not, but the process of making the decision. Here's what he said, but the man who has settled the matter in his own mind and is under no compulsion, but has control over his own will, and who has made up his mind not to marry the virgin, this man also does the right thing. Notice he said he settled it in his mind. He doesn't say, well, somebody pushed me, somebody made me do it, I didn't have any choice. He said, no, this is a matter you have a choice about. You need to settle it in your own mind. Don't do what everybody else tells you to do. It's your responsibility. Then you make a good decision. Learning to use the time that God has given me wisely in relating to others is often difficult and complicated. I like that passage in Acts 24:16, where Paul said, herein do I exercise myself to have a conscience void of offense toward God and toward man. Another translation said, I strive. I like the King James says exercise. Paul says, trying to live by the will of God and to have a clear conscience, I have to break a sweat. I exercise myself. And I really have to work out those issues so that I can have a clear conscience. And God has promised to help. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. Philippians 4 verse 19, my God shall supply all your need according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. As we think of time, if you know what you need to do to obey the Lord, this is the time to do it. If you need to be baptized into Christ, if you need to make restitution or reconciliation with any person, whatever your need is, whatever my need is, today is the day that we need to do it. If I can be helpful, please feel free to give me a call. Thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to talking with you later.